Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, folks. This is Sal Munoz with All Chicago. So really quickly, we're going to be getting started shortly. We had about 50 people register, but about 26 are on with us. So we'll give it another minute or two. But um, like I just mentioned, my name is Sal Munoz. I am the System Implementation Manager with All Chicago. And part of my duties is to ensure that on the HMIS side, that coordinated entry is up and running, that we make changes in HMIS to ensure that you're getting the best matches, to ensure that we're tracking the appropriate things that need to be tracked for clients, etc. And with me today is Sal Estrada. So, Sal, if you could introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm from Catholic Charities. My name is Salvador Estrada. On my end, what we do is all the matching when you guys make requests, and we'll be talking a little bit about that. And it's just our job to make sure that we match properly to your program.
And together we have a goal of confusing everyone because we both have a name that is not very common. And we both have a name that's not very common. But just know that Sal Estrada is with Catholic Charities and Munoz is with All Chicago. What are the chances that there would be two Sals on a coordinated entry system? Not very likely, but apparently it happened. Uh, so just to go over the agenda for today, we're going to start off a little HMIS heavy, and we'll be taking a peek at what the one list looks like, how information is generated from HMIS, and how HMIS informs the one list. Then we'll go into the housing provider eligibility and match request process. And Catholic Charities will then be talking a little bit about their matching process, what goes into sending out the matches to you. From there, we'll be talking about housing provider follow-ups, and primarily that's really about rematches. And we'll end off today with questions. Now, a couple of housekeeping things. We will feel free to send in your questions. I'm not going to be unmuting anyone, but if you do have questions, feel free to send them in through the question dialogue option in your sidebar of GoToWebinar. We also have a PDF of the handouts that you can go ahead and reference for future use. And we also took the questions that you asked at the beginning when upon registration. We took those questions and collected them and tried to integrate as many of them throughout the entire webinar. But just keep in mind that if you ask your question from registration, we put it towards the end. We'll be addressing some of those registration questions towards the end, and we'll be addressing questions that come in towards the end as well. So there will be its own question section. We will not be necessarily answering questions as we go along. We're going to address them all at the end. And I also want to sort of give you a little bit of set your expectations for this webinar a little bit. So this webinar is not a refresher. It's not a refresher to let you know how to, if you're a skilled assessor, how to assess someone. It's not a refresher for housing providers on how to update referral statuses. We have several links throughout this PowerPoint that you can click on, and it'll take you to the appropriate sort of article that can show you how to do that, but we will not be covering any of that. What we're really covering today is to give you a glimpse of how coordinated entry works on the back end. So really, it's going to be heavy on the one list and what the one list looks like. We'll be looking at an empty data set of the one list to show you how many tabs are involved, just how immense the data set itself is. We're going to be talking a little bit about some high-level HMIS data, uh, uh, just talking about the data workflow for HMIS on a very high-level basis. And then Sal from Catholic Charities is going to give you glimpses in terms of how Catholic Charities sends out their matches, how they send out a match, etc. So again, this is not for a refresher. This is not for any kind of reference. This is more so to give you a glimpse behind the curtain, so you have a better understanding of how the OneList operates and how the matching process actually works. And I also want to mention that we will not be delving too much into prioritization. Reason being that the prioritization runs a lot by the VI, and that itself may be changing. If you have not been part of a couple of work groups, there are some proposals to change the prioritization of clients to be more about how their length of homelessness, but that is not what we are going to be concentrating on today. So with all that having been said, we're happy to answer questions, and we're hoping to really bring all of you in and understanding in terms of how HMIS and the OneList and your match requests all interconnect. So with that having been said, let's hop into it. So let's talk a little bit about HMIS and the OneList. So the OneList has two main purposes. It provides a count of individuals and households who are experiencing homelessness, as well as unstably housed youth. So again, when we're talking about individuals, we're talking about those that are over 25 years of age, and 24 years of age, and oftentimes they have to have literal homelessness. So that that includes folks that are in an emergency shelter, folks that are in places not meant for human habitation, and it also includes folks that are fleeing domestic violence. Now, for youth, we talk about unstably housed youth, and what that really means is that it's youth who will be losing out on housing, or youth that don't have the keys to the places that they're staying. There's a lot of waiting around. So for youth, that definition of being doubled up would be considered unstably housed at times if that client does not have keys to the place that they're staying at. And so the OneList lists individuals and households that fall into those categories. And of those people, it shows all of their current project enrollments. So if you have a client who's in 5 different projects at the same time, let's say that they're in a shelter and a drop-in center and then outreach services, etc., the OneList will show every active enrollment that client is currently in. And it doesn't just go by client ID, it goes by unique ID. So the unique ID is the sort of thing that that ServicePoint generates for us, that if a client has a duplicate record, right, you may have encountered this where you find a client who has the same name, has the same date of birth, but they have 2 different records in HMIS. We are able to link that client together through a thing that's generated called the unique ID, which is generated from a couple of universal data elements that client provides to us. So just understand that, all of your open enrollments, if you haven't been exiting clients, we're able to see that. And to us on the OneList, it looks like that client is still actively engaging with your project. So that is sort of the first main purpose, to provide a count of individuals and to also show where those individuals are currently enrolled in. And then it allows us to match people based on community prioritization and eligibility factors of housing programs. So that was a lot of words, but what that really means is that it allows us to match people to the places that would most fit their needs, and while keeping in mind the eligibility of certain projects. So a client who may have some type of severe mental health issues, they may be better suited for a PSH project with organization that exclusively does work with people with severe mental illnesses. So that's just a little bit of what what that means. We use the one list to really determine where does this person best fit, what kind of program type model best works for this client's needs. So I want to take a second to show you what the one list actually looks like. And I'm going to show you an empty Excel file right here. All right, so let's go all the way back. And I just want to show you that there are a lot of tabs to this file. So what happens on a daily basis is that the HMIS team and Catholic Charities, we run this one list. There are about, oh man, there's a huge data set for for this one list every single time. So usually on the unmerged, the one list all unmerged tab, we'll have around 12,000 rows or so that are then parsed out to these different tabs right down here. So let me go through the most important tabs, and then we'll get back into our presentation. So here you can see this is the one list all unmerged tab, and this is essentially just a listing of every single client and every single project enrollment that they currently have throughout the system. So you can see that we have their name, their client ID, and I'll also say that under their name, we also have a little way of showing whether the client has mental health disability, or if they have substance abuse issues, or if they are HIV/AIDS positive. But it's also done in a very private way, so the coding of it is not something that we often put out there. So we have the client's name, their client ID, and again, you can have the same client with several different client IDs, but the one list still treats them the same because we're going to be tracking their unique ID, which you'll see in a bit. So let me make this a little larger for you all. We have a date that a referral went out. Or rather, when the referral went out, the need status of the referral, where the client was referred to, if they were, the veteran status of the client, the chronic homelessness status of the client. Again, that's influenced by the living situation, how long they've been out on the street, and depending on what kind of client you're talking to, we have a listing of their individual VI score, their family VI score, or their youth VI score. Clients that are 18 to 24, they will have a youth VI score. Clients that have a family where the head of household is over 25 and they have children, they will have a family VI score. And then any individual who comes in who is over the age of 25 will have an individual VI score. Then we have some of your basic demographic stuff, age, gender. We have the current projects that they're currently enrolled in. So the way it'll show up is if my client is currently enrolled in a shelter and they're also enrolled in a drop-in center and they don't have an exit date, the client will appear on 2 rows. So it essentially lists out any open enrollments that the client currently has. And along with that, we have the program type of the project, just to see, this is really our way of being able to filter out clients who are currently enrolled in permanent housing. Then we have project entry date, start date. That's essentially when you enter them into your project. The provider contact, the date of the most recent coordinated entry update. So when we tell you to update coordinated entry whenever a client gets in contact with you or whenever information changes, this is why we're indicating that, because this is what keeps your client active. Then length of time homeless. Whether or not they're underreporting disability. If you are familiar with the assessment itself, there's a question asking the assessor, do you believe that they're underreporting their disability? And then we have their most recent exit from rapid rehousing, if eligible, whether or not they're eligible for a voucher based on criminal justice involvement, the makeup of the household, the family type. There is a lot of things to consider here. And then we have the client unique ID. And this is actually this is a total, so it's not a unique ID. And then we have what if there is a veteran, what the character of their discharge was. And as always, the ROI to share, which, as you may be aware, has to be either A, which is sharing with the entire continuum, or B, which is sharing with a select group of providers as a locked file. And any client that's C will is actually not eligible to move forward with this process. So here we go. So this is the main list. This is the big list that then gets parsed out to these smaller tabs. So depending on where the client fell in their VI or what type of approach best fits with them, they are then slotted into either match PSH, match permanent housing with short-term supports, match COC, rapid rehousing, ESG, rapid rehousing, SSVF. So these different project types. And here you can see this is showing us clients that would be best suited for a match to a permanent supportive housing program. And here it's a lot of the same things if they have a referral status or if they had a rematch. So some of you housing providers may have rematched your client. That would show up here. So your client would be showing up as having been referred to your PSH project and then the referral need status that you gave them. Then we have the veteran status. Is it verified? And then where will the client not live? So if they don't want to live on the south side or the west side or the east, or the north side, this is there to inform Catholic Charities to not match a client to a location that falls within one of those. And then if the client would accept an SRO, and again, all of these are on the assessment. And then we come back here with some of the stuff that we've already seen on the one list, all unmatched. All right. And then the rest of these match tabs are the same, essentially. And so I also want to show you some information on what we do for data quality. So something like EDA provider. This tab is here for us to correct you if you were using the wrong EDA provider. We also have a few tabs that serve as data quality that only the HMIS crew follow up on. So here we have the tab of DQ no VI, and so what we'll show here is any clients that have an assessment but don't have an accompanying VI, they will appear right here. And we'll sort this by reason for decline, because there are times where a client may decline, so you now have an assessment that's open, but not the VI because the client may have walked away, the client may have not been interested, XYZ, whatever the reason may be. As long as you put a reason for decline, we know that you missing a VI is legitimate. And then there are several other tabs in here. I mean, it is really a huge listing of information. There are tens of thousands of lines of data in here that we download and review every single day. And in particular, Catholic Charities does this work quite often. So with that having been said, I'm going to hop back into the presentation. And again, folks, feel free to ask any questions if you have any interest in the one list headers. But coming back into this, the one list is generated from information that's in HMIS. And so HMIS is really there because it's already a system that any HUD funded agencies are required to input in to do data entry into. So this is administered by us. Now I want to make clear that we're not the CES leads, but HMIS is the database, the main database used for coordinated entry. So it plays an essential role in ensuring that coordinated entry is successful. So that's HMIS's role, and I want to talk a little bit about Catholic Charities. Sal, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, so basically, we use the one list that Sal was describing. So we utilize the report that comes from HMIS. And the client records on HMIS to review assessments and connect applicants to housing providers with vacancies. So using that aspect and whatever's on the assessment, we make sure that information matches and use the eligibility criteria form that we'll talk about later on to make sure that we make the appropriate match to housing providers.
All right. Thanks, Sal. So I want to talk a little bit about the data cycle, right? So we start out with data in HMIS, and this data can either be your project enrollment that you did for a client, and in addition, it is also the information that we gather from having a client assessed by a skilled assessor. So we take that data in HMIS, we then export it to the one list, and that often comes to us in an Excel format. And from there, Catholic Charities sends that information to the housing provider and in general, other services that we can get into. So the information is sent to the housing provider, and the housing provider, this is a really critical part, the housing provider then updates that information in HMIS. And that information that you update in HMIS, it informs the match it informs the match outcome, and that match outcome informs the one list. So what I'd implore you to think about is that those clients who maybe you received a referral months ago, right? That client who you received a referral months ago, if you have not updated their referral status to be something other than matched awaiting housing provider, that client is sort of in limbo because we really depend on our housing providers to do their due diligence and update the information. Let us know what is happening with the match that the client currently has to your project. Because if we were to assume that we sent you a referral to client A 2 months ago, and when we look at that referral status that we sent you 2 months ago, it still says matched awaiting housing provider. We don't know if you're currently trying to get in contact with him, if you're trying to get them to come in for an intake, if you've done an intake and have determined that it's not a good fit, or if you've done the intake and determined that it is a good fit. We don't know that. We don't know any of that. And so that client is sitting there with that same referral status. So it's critical that you all take a look at the past referral statuses that you have because it really does affect how quickly clients are able to come back into the ecosystem and be matched to the appropriate housing necessary. So really, it is honestly a cycle. The data in HMIS gets exported to the one list, and that informs the matches being made, and then the housing provider has to update the information in HMIS so that we can continue this cycle and can continue to, if a match doesn't work out from one agency, well then let's move them to this other agency, and then we find out a client's no longer homeless, then we can take them off the one list so that their spot opens up for someplace else. So with that having been said, I'm going to go ahead and actually move on, and I'm happy to address more of this as we move further. So let's talk a little bit about who is included on the one list itself. Again, that's all households known to be experiencing homelessness. So what do I mean by homelessness? That means that they are clients who are living in a place not meant for human habitation, or if they are currently in an emergency shelter, and in some definitions that in some definitions that also includes folks who are fleeing domestic violence. And we also include youth between the ages of 18 to 24 years old in unstable housing, and that are known to HMIS. So that means that they should have had some type of enrollment into a project in HMIS. If they're just coming off the street to get onto coordinated entry, that there's a little bit of iffiness there. But when it comes to clients that are 18 to 24 that have a history of unstable housing, they're going to drop-in centers, during the day because they're couch surfing at night and they don't have a solid place to stay during the day, that is someone who is unstably housed, and as a youth, we want to house them. And then people meeting the above criteria are included if they have or have not been assessed. So we include people in the one list if they are experiencing homelessness, or if they are 18, or if they are a youth in an unstable housing situation. Although I do want to mention that a client will not be matched to housing if they have not been assessed. So don't assume that your client is checked into an emergency shelter, they're on the one list, and they'll be matched to housing. No, we need to have that client assessed to match them to housing. And so I want to talk a little bit about prioritization. So once a person has been assessed, the coordinated entry process moves on to determining his or her priority for housing and the supportive services based on the assessment. And then we take into effect every household intervention, and that's PSH, rapid rehousing, youth transitional, etc., has a matching tab in order of priority. So the Excel sheet that I had shown you, those tabs all are sorted by that client's priority, the priority standards for our community. So the sort of path is below. A client is assessed, they're placed on the one list, and then depending on their priority and what is the best housing intervention, they're matched to that certain housing intervention. And then from that housing intervention, they are then housed officially. Okay, so let's move on. So it's the person's prioritization status that determines where they'll be referred to in the next coordinated entry step. And that's, again, really informed by the assessment that's completed by the skilled assessors. If any of you are skilled assessors, you know that the VI has a lot of really sensitive questions, and the assessment itself has sensitive questions as well. So a lot of that is pulling in and impacting how we are prioritizing that client. And then the persons with the highest priority are offered a match first. And so depending on the intervention type, whether it be PSH, rapid rehousing, or youth transitional housing, that priority sort of shifts. So one thing that I hear a lot might be that you have a client who is homeless. Maybe they've been homeless for the past 6 months. They don't have a disability, but other clients that you might have assessed who are chronically homeless and have a disability, they are being matched to housing quicker. In that instance, it's because that client that's chronically homeless has a higher prioritization status. They have a higher priority. It doesn't matter. The one list does not operate it necessarily does not operate in a chronological sense. It operates on the way that we prioritize someone. So your client might have been on there for 2 months, but if another client comes in that has significant needs to be met, then that client will have a higher priority to be housed than the client who may have been waiting and doesn't have as many conditions that would necessitate housing as quickly. So really, it's operating by priority. It's operating by the vulnerability of the client, not necessarily the chronological order in which they did their assessment. And one of the things that I showed you on the one list is that there are ways to filter for eligibility. This includes project type, youth client, whether they're a youth client, the household type, so sort of looking at the household makeup of the household itself, are there adults, how many children, etc., the area median income level of the head of household, their location preference, if they're willing to engage in a SRO, if they have a disability, whether they signed the release of information and what their decision was, if they are comfortable sharing their information, and then their current and past program enrollment. And so, just to go back to prioritization, it really does have to do with who is elevated to the top of the list for each housing intervention. For example, if we take thresholds, which requires a mental health condition, if they have a PSH opening for a single individual in a chronic project, the first person to be eligible will be the highest prioritized person who meets the eligibility criteria, including being impacted by a mental health condition. So on the list, it may be where this person who has a mental health condition is fifth or sixth down on the list. But we know because thresholds requires someone who has a mental health condition, we're going to go to that fifth or sixth person because they are the next ones in line that are the highest prioritized and that have a mental health condition. The factors that are involved in prioritization, order the list, and the factors involved by eligibility rule out those who cannot be housed by the project. So going back a slide, if your client says that they don't want to stay on the south side and we have a person at the top of the list and they indicated they don't want to live on the south side, we're going to move on to the next person who said they are comfortable living on the south side. And that might be person number 2 or person number 3 on the list. So I will let Sal take it over from here.
Okay, so we'll be talking about housing provider eligibility and match requests. So on the next slide, what you'll see to your left is the Google Doc that we asked you guys to fill out before actually making a request for a match. So the aim of the coordinated entry is to send you the best initial match. This is done by setting your eligibility, and it's a one-time thing you guys have to do for your project. Once this is done, then we'll be able to better make a match for you guys. Obviously, you can update this like as we move on, like if you need to change primary contact information, if someone no longer works there, you would just go back in here and update whatever you need for your program.
And folks, it is really critical to put in the contact information and keep that up to date. Catholic Charities actively looks for that, and we also look for that as well.
So, and this is what we see on our end once the form is completed. And you can see agency name, project name, individual who completed the form, email address, and it gives us, specifics to your program. So this is crucial for us because we look into this to see, does this project serve only individuals? Does this project serve families? Is it a youth program? Various questions that are asked all around, if you can see, and it'll ask, like, does your project require the individuals or the head of household have a disability? Income under 30% AMI, is there an income requirement? Is it up to 50%? So this is key for us when we match, because we'll look specifically at all these different columns to see what was filled out when you guys were filling out the form.
And I also want to give you a little bit of insight in terms of what that looks like in HMIS. So what we have to do is, once this comes into us, we then take that, and the HMIS team does a sort of SQL query in Service Point on the back end, so that we create these filters that require whatever conditions you previously set. So here you can see that this is likely for single chronically homeless individuals. So we have an OR function, like, either they're 25 and older and their categories homeless or fleeing domestic violence, or they're between the ages of 18 to 24 and they're either homeless, fleeing domestic violence, or they're unstably housed. They have to have they must have a disabling condition. They must have a household equal to 1. They must not be a sex offender, etc. So this eligibility helps. This is what the eligibility ultimately looks on our end, and this is what's driving the matching process for your agencies. And Sal will get into how that eligibility matching is done.
So on your left, you see the Google Doc that you guys fill out once the project eligibility form is complete. You fill this out, you put your email, agency name, project contact person, and once you submit it, we'll be able to see on our end a matching board that we have. So the rematch request form is actually exactly like the match request. If you move on to the next slide, as you can see, so if your initial match does not work out for whatever reason, then you would submit a rematch request. And you would, before you submit a rematch though, please make sure that you're updating your referral status in HMIS, because if it stays as CES awaiting housing provider, then we're thinking that you're still working with that person. And if you make a rematch request and then that person doesn't go back into the one list, and then we won't be able to potentially match them to another housing provider.
Awesome. So we're gonna get
and then we'll go through the process of how when we do matching. So we broke it down to 4 steps. And step 1 is Catholic Charities receives the match request. Step 2, Catholic Charities finds the next eligible household on the one list. Step 3, Catholic Charities goes into HMIS to match the household. And step 4 is Catholic Charities communicates with all connected parties about the match. So this is what we see on our end once the match form is completed, or the rematch request form. As you can see, it has a timestamp, agency name, project contact person, email, and type of housing program, and then number of openings. If you are requesting more than one, please make sure that you say how many you need, because if you don't put anything, we're assuming that it's only one that you want. So if you need 2 or 3, please make sure that you're filling that out. And then the bottom one, you can see there's more information that's crucial for us. I think it's if your program is HAPA funded, is it a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom? That's really helpful for us when we're matching to your programs, to make sure that we can send you the right match the first time and not have to, for you guys not to have to request a rematch. And step 2 would be, step 2 is finding the next eligible prioritized client on the one list based on project eligibility. So this is how it looks when we're looking at the one list. Sal touched on it earlier, but this time you can see there's like referral need status. This is someone already that was matched, but the household composition, so they were ineligible. It tells us current projects, and if it's highlighted like that, it's telling us that this is a program that they've recently left. It hasn't been that long that program has been left. You can see referral dates here, and it gives you the age, gender, pretty much what Sal went over earlier, but it's just showing you now VI scores as well. Like this person right here, like Arya Stark, there's a family VI score of 9 and youth VI score of 5, and then Sansa Stark, you see on the bottom, if you, the programs that they're in, and this person says not experiencing chronically homelessness, and we look for statuses like these, and like, for example, chronically homeless status would require a chronic packet that we'll talk about further down the line right now. And this is still part of how the one list looks. Program type, you can see project entry date, project exit date, provider contact. If there's provider contact information, when we make a match for a rematch, we make sure that we connect this person with the housing provider. So our goal is to try to connect as many people possible that if we've seen any recent interaction from that client, to try to make this as smooth as possible for you guys. I'm trying to contact the client. And then you see household makeup on the bottom, adults, children. So this is really important as well for skilled assessors to make sure you guys get right, because this really tells us if we can match to that program. If it's a program that's specifically only for one adult and 2 children, or just individuals, because sometimes we will see that it says adult 1, children 3, and when we make a match, it turns out that it's only an individual and not with children. So that then triggers a rematch request that has to be made on our end, and then for you guys to do. Steps 3, sending the match through HMIS. After determining the possible referral, the CES entity uses HMIS to proceed with matching. Our team here at Catholic Charities then has to enter EDA mode using a CES Skilled Assessor Project 1474 and you can see the arrow pointing at the brown green plus. We'll have to go under that mode in order to be able to see the assessments that have been completed for that client. Continuing with step 3 would be entering their HMIS ID and client ID number to enter their file. And then we would go into service transactions once we located the match that we're going to do. And it'll take us to eligibility search. Then we click on that icon, and then it brings us into eligibility service code quick look. This is the eligibility module, and this touches on what Sal was saying, how they take out information. So for example, if we were matching to PSH program, the highlighted is homeless permanent supportive housing. So we would click on that, we would click add select service terms, and then it'll prompt us in the bottom, it'll give us the information saying homeless permanent supportive housing. And it tells us there's 4 eligible programs that this client would fit into, 76 potential and 50 ineligible. So we'll break these 3 down and explain them right now, I think is the next slide. So if it's eligible, it means that that person meets all the requirements for those 4 programs that are in there. So that it should be, based on the assessment, it should be a good match right off the bat. Potential means that there was some questions that weren't answered, but could be a good match for a program. So it's based on the assessment. So if there's a question that wasn't answered, for example, I'm just going to use income. If it's a program that's someone put 30% income, if it didn't specify what it was or of what was the limit, then it could be a potential match. Ineligible would be a list of programs that this specific person cannot qualify based on the answers that were given in the assessment. And so once we identify all that and we pick the program that the person's being matched, we change the status to CES match awaiting response by housing provider. And that's how it'll stay until the housing provider changes that status to, I think it's CES. Sal, help me out here, attempt or contact?
Yeah, attempted contact. And the housing providers are required to do that within 2 days. So you have to change it from CES matched awaiting response by housing provider to attempting contact within 2 days. And that's obviously after you give them a call. It's not just there for you to change it. It's actually send them an email, give them a call, and change the referral status.
Okay. And then once we do that, you'll see in the bottom, it'll show in the service transactions history, the need status has been made at CES match awaiting response by housing provider. So it's essentially waiting for you guys to be reviewed. And then what we'll do once the match is made, we go into a client's profile and we'll click on the assessment pencil. So the one on the left, we'll click on that. It'll take us into their assessment that has been completed. And then what we'll do is we will unlock that assessment to the specific agency. Let's just say it's for La Casa Norte. So that little house indicates that assessment has been open for that specific agency only. And that's how you're able to view the assessment.
And then typically, if you do end up having trouble, you will email HMIS, or you can also respond to the email that Catholic Charities sent to you. And really what Catholic Charities does is that they'll email HMIS for us to open up the record, because that can happen at times.
Yeah, and either works. I mean, we have no problem if you guys email the CES Catholic Charities email. We will take care of it. We'll reach out to all Chicago to help you guys and make sure that everything's accessible and visible to you guys. So and then step 4 would be sending out the match email. That's the final step of the matching process. The email we send to the skilled assessor, housing provider, navigator, any case manager listed in the assessment. The email will include HMIS history if there's any, current and past programs if the applicant has signed the HMIS release, allowing for sharing information. So this is an example of how the matching email would look. If you see it says, "Hi, Sal, referral that was made, and we'll copy the skilled assessor on this email. And then, if you guys have any trouble, you can always reach us, and we'll try to help any way that we can. And then the next example would be an email with HMIS history on it. It'll show if the client has been in any previous programs and when they exited the program. And in this case, for example, if Heartland Health Outreach Path, if that person has not been exited, and we will try to see what's the contact information, and we will CC that person as well, stating that this person has been matched to a housing provider to see if they're able to connect or help in any way in making a connection with the housing provider that has been matched to this client. So now housing provider follow-up. So this is sending out a rematch is pretty much the same. So let's broke it down to 4 steps, which is Catholic Charities receives the rematch. That's the Google Doc that you guys fill out. Catholic Charities identify its need status. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Catholic Charities goes into HMIS to match the household. Catholic Charities communicates with all connected parties about the match. So here, you see here in rematches is what we do is we identify need status. So CES rematch needed, not able to contact client is 1. CES rematch needed, ineligible, not experience chronically homelessness. CES rematch needed, client engaged, unit no longer available. If need status is not able to contact client, an email will be sent to the programs. The client is enrolled and given them 1 business day to reply, and recent contact has been made with the client. So when we see that in the rematch request form, we'll look at the 1 list and see if this client has been in any program or is in a shelter, dropped in, whatever it is, and we'll go in there and we'll send out an email giving them 24 hours to contact us to see if they have contact with them. If there is contact, we'll reach out to the housing provider that made the rematch request and connect them and say, hey, this person's over here, please try again, as opposed to sending a rematch. So we try to make it so we don't have to send you a rematch and keep it as 1-to-1. And then if need status is not experiencing chronically homeless, which is the CH packet would be needed, it needs to be filled out by the housing provider, giving us details of homeless history or stating no disability was observed and then uploading to HMIS. And then we're able to see that on a different EDA mode. I think it's 1525, and we'll be able to access the chronic packet and see the reason as to why this person is not chronically homeless. If the need status is client engaged, unit no longer available, client is prioritized on the 1 list for the next available spot. And then on the bottom, I put TSA rematches are 2-to-1. That being that when you request a rematch, we'll send you 2 for 1 request that you make. So if you're requesting 2 rematches, you're going to get 4. So if you only have 2 openings, you would only request 1. I know this happened a while back. Somebody was requesting, for example, 5, or let's just say 6 because they needed 6, but they weren't aware of a 2-to-1. So what we were doing is we were sending 12. So I think that's important to understand that if you request a rematch, you will be getting 2.
All right, folks. So this is the time to ask questions, and while you actually work on asking us questions, we are going to address some of the questions that we got in from your registration forms. So let's take a look at some of them, and we'll be answering them as we go along. So why does individual VI ask about intravenous drug use but not about snorting heroin? Well, the VI we can go. This would count as just drug use. I think that we ask about intravenous drug use because there's higher risk with that. Intravenous drug users tend to be at higher risk of HIV/AIDS. They tend to be at higher risk of several other things rather than snorting or using other methods to do for drug use. So I think really what the point is to address that client's state in terms of like, are they sharing needles, or is there potential that this person could be sharing needles or have something or be at higher risk of getting HIV/AIDS. So really, that's part of the reason in terms of why we're asking that, but also, we're always. I think there's going to be an update to the assessment, and I can't say when that will happen or when we're going to be revisiting it, but we will be adding additional questions. I'm not going to say that snorting, a question about snorting heroin will be on there, but how we ask questions on what certain topics will be changing. Do adults ever get matched? And why do some people take longer to get matched? Yes, adults get matched, and some people take longer because they have a lower prioritization. So really, that's it. It's determined by the community prioritization plan. How can our clients benefit from the coordinated entry system? Well, it can connect them to housing. It can connect them to several different projects that could potentially assist them in gaining housing. Now, how can it be more efficient in connecting all clients for housing? There's only one non-veteran client contacted since May 2018, and I think that's a great question. What I'd ask is, what agency are you from? Of the clients that you're working with, do you do the skilled assessment? There might be something. There might be an issue with client. I mean, we're really trying to improve the system and ensure that our process is one that is getting clients quicker into housing than not getting them to housing. So, as far as that question goes, it's something that we are constantly working on and looking to solve. Now, this question in terms of who set the rule that 365 I think they meant to say consecutive days is needed to be considered homeless. That needs to be revisited. Well, there are a few things erroneous about this question. So it's a year, 12 months of either a consecutive homelessness or 4 episodes of homelessness over the past 3 years that add up to 12 months. So it's not consecutive, and it's not to be considered homeless. It is to be considered chronically homeless, and that also requires a disability. So chronic homeless is different than literal homelessness, and literal homelessness means, you're living in an emergency shelter, a safe haven, or on the streets in a place not meant for human habitation. That can include abandoned buildings, cars, whatever it may be. These are HUD mandates. These are HUD rules. This is a HUD definition, and we are a community that has to abide by HUD data standards. So again, it is not to be considered homeless. It is to be considered chronically homeless. Then are individuals receiving calls or assistance with employment? And also, is there a way to identify individuals who are paraplegic? This is a great question. I'll answer the first one first. We do have a question on there to see if a person is willing to receive services for job search. Now, I know we have a workforce work group that works on this, so I can't speak to the work that they're currently doing in terms of what they do with the matches or do with the clients that indicate they would like assistance with employment. Unfortunately, I can't speak any more to that, but I do know that we are tracking that question, and there is a work group and an agency that does work with that. And then, are there any ways to identify individuals who are paraplegic? Great question. I believe we do ask questions if the client does need an accessible unit, but to determine whether they're paraplegic, I think that we can definitely revisit the assessment to see what are some ways that we can phrase this question to get to that information. And we also have a couple of questions that came in as I was talking. So I'm going to go with Hilda Tamayo's question first. What does COC mean? So COC is just the continuum of care. Uh, yeah, it's the continuum of care. It's the general sort of like HUD. It is the general HUD geographic area of work that we have to do. Latrice asks, is there other help for clients that are in housing like ours where they can stay for 4 to 6 months? Latrice, I'm not sure what kind of project you have, but I'm going to use this as a plug for bridge housing potentially. So if you are a PSH provider and you have a client who is eligible and you're ready to house them, but you need a couple of weeks to prep the unit, or another client's leaving and that unit will open up to this client, to this new client that you just interviewed and did an intake for. In that instance, you can request bridge housing as long as you have the client enrolled in your project. And bridge housing, it's sort of, we house the client so that they're actually housed while they're waiting to get that permanent housing from you. So there's that, but I'm not sure what the original intention of your question is. And then Troy asked, should housing providers be given a time limit to update information? Yes, Troy, there is time frames for every single step that housing providers have to have for them to update their need statuses. So those PSH providers, the housing providers, you may have noticed that your ATAs are now starting to get SQL emails. They're automatically generated emails that are coming out to you. Those automatically generated emails are our way of, reminding you that there are certain referral statuses that you may need to update. So from a status being matched, awaiting housing provider, housing provider is required to update that within 2 days to attempted contact, and then the housing provider has to give the client at least 10 days so that they can get back to them, so that the client has the opportunity to get back to them. And that attempting contact, some providers are pretty quick, 10 days, then they change the referral or request a rematch. But then there are some providers that will give the client up to a month sometimes, or a pretty significant time for them to get back to them. So sometimes it changes and it varies depending on the client. Then these are the final questions that I'm going to be answering because we are going over time. So Will is asking, yeah, well, this is a good question. So is a client considered to be receiving services from an emergency shelter if they answered emergency shelter in the question, where did you stay last night? I'm going to answer that first one. No. So we would need to see if the client indicated that they said emergency shelter, then it's presumed that that client will also be enrolled in an emergency shelter somewhere. So if that client is indeed enrolled in an emergency shelter, then you don't have to reach out to them to make sure that they are, to update their referral, whatever it may be. But if they just tell you that they came from an emergency shelter and maybe you take a look at their record and there's no other entry, then that might be an indication that that client may not be in an emergency shelter, or at least they're not in an emergency shelter here in the city of Chicago. They may be in an emergency shelter out in suburban Cook, or they are or maybe they're at a place they think is an emergency shelter that isn't, because I know sometimes during the cold winter months, churches may open up, community centers may open up. So just keep that in mind. And then Will is also asking, is there data on the number of chronically homeless clients matched to housing compared to clients from special populations that have been matched to housing? Will, that's a bit of a big question to ask right now. I don't have that necessarily prepared, but I will say that we are our priority is chronically homeless individuals. So I'd say that it's a pretty significant chunk of our of the clients that we house. So chronically homeless clients are prioritized pretty highly. So just keep that in mind. But unfortunately, for the purposes of this webinar, I do not have that data on hand. And folks, I think that's it. I'm going to go ahead and move on. So here is our contact information. You can reach Sal Estrada at chicagoces@catholiccharities.net. You can reach myself at chicagoces@allchicago.org. Or for those of you that are HMIS users, you know that HMIS@allchicago.org is also available for you. You can go to our help desk and submit a ticket, whatever it may be. And then here are not rematches. This was an erroneous title. Here are some more resources for you to be able to use. What Sal referenced, the project eligibility details form, the match request form, and rematch request form are all here. Throughout this entire presentation, I hyperlinked to a bunch of All Chicago HMIS help desk articles. So be on the lookout for that as well. Sal, is there anything else you want to mention?
No, I'm good.
All right. Well, folks, this is Sal Munoz and Sal Estrada signing off. Thank you so much for joining us. This presentation will be recorded. Be on the lookout for it on our HMIS help desk. And
Stay warm, everybody.
Yeah, stay warm. Stay warm, everyone. All right. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye.